Not long after I finally got an NES, the Sega Genesis was released. I had a number of friends with the system, and the speed of Sonic soon caught my attention. I really don't recall ever feeling upset with the NES's lack of power compared to the Sega Genesis. Most of the games I enjoyed didn't really depend on superior graphics, but more unique gameplay hooks. But the only way I was likely to get a Genesis was to buy one myself. One of my friends decided to get rid of his Genesis and games, so to raise the money to buy it off of him, I set about the task of selling my NES and its games. Now, this was in the dark days before Funko Land and GameStop, so my dad actually helped me put an ad in the local paper to sell my system.
Which was the style at the time?
Not long after, I had enough money to properly compensate my friend, and a Sega Genesis entered the home. I've held my affinity for the Genesis over the years, and when Sonic Mania released, I introduced my niece-fuse to the series. My niece Lydia took to it the most, and while she had some issues with its difficulty, I then introduced her to Sonic 2 via the Genesis collection on the PS4. Though she'll sample newer games every time I visit, she always likes to dip back into Sonic 2. So when the time came to plan this video, Lydia was my first and only choice to sample the games I enjoyed on the Genesis when I was not much older than she was. First on the list was one of the first RPGs I ever really got into, Shining in the Darkness. I remember playing this at a friend's house after youth group meetings, and we all giggled at Old Vic since that was our youth pastor's last name. Aside from that, I loved and still love the first-person dungeon crawling. I'd make my way through with graph paper in hand, forging my way forward. I never beat this as a kid for one heartbreaking reason. I didn't realize how necessary the shining equipment was to defeat the final boss, and the game had let me throw it away. Took me over 20 years to play through it enough again to actually finish it, which I finally did during a series of Twitch live streams. Next up is one that I keep trying to haul out when I visit the kids, and I keep screwing up the multiplayer setup somehow, the Lost Vikings. I never really got to try the 3-player aspect as a kid, and there aren't many cooperative puzzle games out there in general, much less on the Genesis. I still haven't finished this game, and the only reason I've gotten to the final level was because I noticed the passcodes all related to the levels, so I tried MSTR, and it took me to the final boss. Kid Chameleon is one I hope to see remade or remastered at some point in the future, as it's another one of those unique experiences to be had on the Genesis. Sure, there were plenty of platformers out there, but I love the helmet system and the non-linear nature of how the levels are put together. Not only are there multiple exits from some levels, but some of those can only be reached via the powers of one mask or another. Definitely a game that, in my mind, doesn't get the appreciation it deserves. Shining Force is another one I loved as a kid, and I did beat this one. I even picked up Shining Force 2 when it was released, and the Sword of Haja when I got my Game Gear. I didn't mind at all that the follow-up to Shining in the Darkness was so different. TRPGs were a new concept to me, and I loved the chess but better aspect of moving an entire army around each battlefield. By the way, if you're interested, I'm slowly working my way through the Shining and Fantasy series on my Twitch channel at TesseractD. Come check it out. I was tempted to put Sonic 3 on this list as it really is my favorite out of the original Genesis games, but I had so much more tying me to Sonic 2 that it ultimately won out. Aside from Lydia's more recent affection for the title, it was one of the first games I owned for the Genesis, coming along with my initial purchase of the console. My sister and I would occasionally play it together, but since she found it frustratingly difficult at times, we'd play least coins wins on the special stages. Don't knock it, it's tougher than it sounds. Tasmania is one of the few duds on this list. It's not a bad game, but it's not that great of one either. I give it full marks for the vivid visuals and spot-on sounds that make you feel like you're playing a cartoon, but the gameplay itself is a bit wonky and not the easiest to get into. The reason it's here is because I, for some reason, have vivid memories of renting this game multiple times. Sadly, I don't recall if I ever managed to complete it. Toe Jam and Earl, now here is a legendary game. I could easily talk about this game for a full video, but suffice to say, this is probably the game I spent the most time on, mostly because of its randomly generated levels and because my sister actually liked playing this one with me as a kid since it was cooperative. I still go back to the original from time to time even today, and even now that Back in the Groove exists. If you don't have this in your Genesis collection, fix that right now. One thing you're unlikely to see very often in any list of mine that includes favorite games are sports titles. But Powerball is a rare exception. It's very much inspired by the Speedball series from the Amiga, but taking advantage of one major bonus the Genesis had over its microcomputer cousin: more buttons on the controller. It plays like a futuristic rugby with the ability to upgrade your team as you progress through a season. It's pretty great, and I recommend giving it a try. With how much I love Toe Jam and Earl, I absolutely had to grab the sequel when it released. Sure, Panic on Funkatron is quite a departure from the original, but I wasn't used to Final Fantasy. I was used to Shining Force. I thought switching up the formula was just what sequels did. I know it's viewed as a bit of a black sheep, but I had a lot of fun with this game and played it all the way through as a kid. Then I went right back to playing the original game again. Last on this list is Sonic & Knuckles. The lock-on technology blew my mind as a kid, and I already had Sonic 3 on hand, so now I was able to play the full experience. The biggest significance here is that this was the last game I got from my dad before he died. Later on, I traded in my Genesis and its games to get a PlayStation, much as I did with my NES to get a Genesis, and only now that I'm older and wiser do I really regret doing that. My dad would have totally approved, but when I started building my gaming collection again, getting a full copy of Sonic & Knuckles was a high priority. I know it's not the same cartridge, but it's more of an homage. My family owes its tech savvy to him, and aside from the Commodore 64, it's one of the best memorials I can think of. So, now that we've gone over the Genesis contenders, which one out of the bunch did Lydia decide on as her favorite?
Okay, Lydia. What? Tell me about the game you liked on the Sega Genesis.
What were the two games where you like?
Shining in the Darkness?
Yeah, those two. That one was really fun because you like, it's challenging but not too challenging, and you can fight in different ways, and it's really fun.
Cool. Thank you.
She also enjoyed Shining Force, but Shining in the Darkness just edged it out. I was kinda surprised it wasn't Sonic 2, but I couldn't be happier to be wrong. Which of these would you pick as your favorite? How different would your top 10 be from mine? Let me know in the comments below or on Twitter at TesseractUnfold. In the meantime, like, subscribe, share, and enjoy, and I'll catch you next time when we take a look at my DOS and early Windows favorites.